Papa Giovanni Paolo I è morto.
After 33 days of pontificate, Pope John Paul I has died.
Après 33 jours de pontificat, le pape Jean-Paul Ier est mort. Ce matin, 29 septembre 1978.
On September 29, 1978, at dawn, the world is stunned by the news of John Paul I's death after a pontificate lasting only 33 days.
Le pape était mort dans son lit.
Rumors begin to fly almost as soon as his death is announced on Radio Vatican. These rumors will be very quickly fueled by contradictory dispatches communicated by the Vatican itself. How did Pope John Paul I spend his last day? When and how did he die?
La mort du pape, c'est un mystère.
The Pope's death is a mystery. No one has anything to say about it because no one saw it or wanted to listen. I realized that what I was told did not correspond exactly to the truth. Albino Luciani, born in 1912, was Venetian. He became a priest in 1935, bishop in 1958, and then Patriarch of Venice in 1969. Cardinal Vio, who was meditating here before the body lying in state, had been received the day before by the Pope. 33 days before, the conclave had elected Cardinal Luciani Pope. He took the name John Paul I. But let's go back to his last day. His daily schedule consisted of quickly getting up between 5 and 5:30 a.m. Around 6, he was at his seat in the private chapel, some 20 meters from here. He read and meditated. At 7, he celebrated Holy Mass. At 7:30, he had a quick breakfast, and from 8 to noon, he gave an audience to those who had requested speaking to him.
The day before John Paul first died, he had a fairly normal day. In the morning, he had audiences, a very large audience with people from Brazil. And he seemed to be very sprightly and in a good mood. In fact, the photographer who was taking a group photograph of these Brazilians remembers how the Pope leapt up and helped with the chairs, arranging the chairs for this photograph.
That September 28th morning, John Paul I gave his first audiences as usual on the second floor. These audiences were long awaited. There are still many tourists in Rome in September, many pilgrims. And there were so many people that there wasn't enough room in the church, which has room for some 10 to 12,000 people, counting those who are standing. And the tradition had not been created yet. It was John Paul II who started it, to celebrate Mass on the square outside when there are so many people. So we said to him, Holy Father, there is no other solution. You must celebrate 2 Masses, one here and the other in St. Peter's Cathedral. And he replied, you really want the death of me. Between 9 and noon, the Pope received members of the Roman Catholic Action, Cardinal Gantin, the Nuncio of Holland, and then a group of young Brazilian pilgrims. At noon, he had lunch with his 2 secretaries, Father Maget and Don Diego Lorenzi. He always had lunch around 12:30. Then he rested without actually taking a nap. He went right back to work around 2:30, perhaps 3. After his rest, around 3 in the afternoon, the Pope feels tired. He decides not to take his daily walk through the Vatican gardens. The weather has also become colder since yesterday.
On this particular day, though, he claimed that he wasn't feeling too well, and so his secretary suggested that he should take this exercise in a large room that's called the Salone. And he walked around this room for about an hour or so, quite fast. He had an apparent circulation problem in his ankles.
Cardinal Vilo, who that morning had requested an audience with the Pope, arrived at the Vatican around 5 p.m. Some sources say it was 6:30 p.m. That afternoon, Cardinal Vilo arrived around 5 o'clock for an audience that lasted 1 to 1.5 hours. We were called for dinner at 7:45. Then came the phone call, so much has been written about. The call to Cardinal Colombo in Milan around 9. I remember well that it was during this last dinner. We talked about the exercise in piety that we perform as religious novices. A text by St. Alfonso, the exercise of a proper death.
Don Diego Lorenzi, the Italian secretary who was very close to him, told me that he used to pray 1,000 times a day to die. And against that background, it's interesting that during the very last meal he could talk about nothing but death. It's as if he'd had some sort of intuition that it was going to happen.
Shortly before 9 p.m., the Pope has Cardinal Colombo called in Milan a second time. The conversation concerns his audience with Cardinal Vilo. He was sitting at this desk. The conversation began around 9 o'clock, after which he bade Father Maggi and I good night and went to the bathroom. Around 10 that night, the Pope feels ill. He himself calls his personal doctor in Venice, who prescribes some medicine to be taken immediately. The night of his death, he called his doctor in Venice and asked him what to do, because he was not feeling well. A few moments after his phone call, the Vatican pharmacy is opened in order to obtain the digitaline, the heart pills, prescribed by the doctor, medication to be dosed with great precaution. It is immediately taken to the Pope's rooms. John Paul I was found dead early in the morning, and when we heard the tolling of the bell at 7 in the morning, this was something most unusual. The great bell of St. Peter's Cathedral resounding throughout the city. Everyone wondered what was going on, and I rushed to my office and I was told that the Pope was dead. Thus ended the last day of the Pope's life, the last day ending one of the shortest pontificates in history. However, the half-truths, the secrecy, the dissimulations also paved the way for various interpretations on the why and how of John Paul I's death.
If the Vatican, of all places in the world, tells lies, which is in fact what they did, about who found the body of the Pope and what he was doing when he was found, the circumstances, what he was holding, then you do cast an air of suspicion over the death itself. I think that it's perfectly understandable that they wouldn't want to announce to the world that a nun wakes the Pope up every day with coffee.
Officially, it was Father Maggi who found him. In fact, it was a nun who found the Holy Father's body. Around 5 to 5:30 a.m., Sister Vincenza, famous Sister Vincenza, found him when she brought him his coffee. She left it in front of his door. A half hour later, she opened the door and she saw him. He was on his side, with his knees up, holding a sheet of paper in his hands. Today, there are no documents concerning John Paul I's 33-day pontificate in the Vatican's secret archives. It's not hard to see why rumors circulate. Was the Pope poisoned? If so, by whom? The Pope's brother doesn't believe it.
Secondo me sono tutte chiacchiere artificiali.
For me, all these rumors are false.
Soprattutto dei giornalisti per avere qualche argomento eclatante. E quello scrittore
It's the journalists who are trying to make themselves interesting, creating a controversy, especially all the fuss about that English writer.
Ma per me sono tutte chiacchiere.
It's this man whose book scandalizes people, David Yallop. Stubbornly, he defends the thesis of the Pope's assassination.
I believe that the Pope was poisoned. He was taking only one medication at that time for low blood pressure, and I believe that medicine was tampered with, probably, and this is a hypothesis that is sustainable on circumstantial evidence, by digitalis. Digitalis was a drug much favored by an organization called P2, Propaganda 2. It's an illegal Masonic lodge. It exists today as we talk. Its head, Licio Gelli, in my view, today has more power than the Prime Minister of Italy, Andreotti.
Je pense presque le monde entier.
I think almost the entire world has made the assumption that he was poisoned. It's a totally unwarranted legend.
So unless you're going to say that the secretaries murdered the Pope, I would find that difficult to accept.
Under these conditions, why not think he simply died of natural causes? There had been a history of sudden deaths in his family.
Io credo che sia un male di famiglia.
It runs in the family. There have been several sudden deaths. The idea of our family being predisposed to this is the most solid one to me. I'm not 100% certain because I wasn't there that night. In my opinion, he died an absolutely natural death. In the sense that it was caused by an error that Pope Luciani made himself in the dose of medicine that he took. Will the truth ever be known about what really happened behind these two windows between 10 in the evening and 5 in the morning, September 28, 1978? That day was to be the 33rd and last day of his pontificate, but neither he nor his entourage knew it.